Hi, this is Amber.
And this is Lisa.
And you're listening to Unexplained Arkansas, a new podcast that explores urban legends, mysteries, and the unsolved in the natural state.
We're just two best friends discussing the unexplained in Arkansas.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, and welcome to Unexplained Arkansas. This is Amber.
And this is Lisa on Flu A.
Yeah, it's been an eventful 20 minutes talking to her already. Yeah.
Yes.
Lisa has the flu, as she just said, and is going to, brave through it and help us finish up episode 3 of our West Memphis 3 series.
Part 3.
Part 3, here we come. So are you sure you're up to this?
I'm up to it. I can do it.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So first, we'll just kind of recap what went on in the first couple of episodes. We talked about the crime itself, and we talked about the investigation, the suspects, and we ended last time with Jesse Miskelly's trial. And that is where we are going to pick up today.
Yes. Perfect. And I did, bear with me. So I wrote this all out because I did miss something that I wanted to mention in the suspects category. Other than he is called Mr. Bojangles incident, which we discussed in part 1, which was the man that came into the Bojangles covered in blood with a cast, kind of, wigging out the night of the murders, the night the boys went missing. So there were 2 other suspects that the police kind of looked at before, arresting Miss Kelly and and Eccles and Baldwin. And their names were Chris Morgan and Brian Holland. And these men had drug connections in the area, and evidently the Chris Morgan, he lived in the area, and he had actually been maybe selling ice cream in the area. He was like a ice cream man, which is very scary. And
that's interesting.
Yes,
that's really interesting. Like in an ice cream truck.
In an ice cream truck, evidently. That's what I understood from this. And it seemed like right after they were kind of on the police radar anyway, just because they had drug connections. So I'm sure it was one of those things that they're kind of, watched or whatever. But 4 days after the bodies were found, they fled to Oceanside, California. And so
wait. They left.
They left
after the bodies were found.
They left the city, and went very, very far away.
With the ice cream truck.
Did they take the ice cream truck?
No, I don't know. I'm wondering. There's so much to think about right here.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, why would they leave?
Exactly. That was kind of the West Memphis PD's feelings on that. This was suspicious, and so they wanted them tracked down, and so they did call out to California and have them picked up and polygraphed and questioned. And again, with the polygraph, they did show some deceptions when they were asked about the murders of the boys. And so, and even during the questioning, evidently Chris got upset, and he just made some comments that were real out there. He mentioned he was on drugs and that he had blackouts, and then he was like, so maybe I did do it. And then he immediately was like, no, I didn't do it. I don't know anything about it. So he was all acting weird. He was definitely acting suspicious.
I would say so, yeah.
So the California PD there did collect blood and urine from both men and sent those to Memphis. So just keep that in your, catalog. So, true story. You good there?
Yeah, I'm just
okay.
Yeah, that's a bombshell. I mean, I bet a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, that was in That was in the
Mara's book,
documentaries
right?
and Mara's book. Yes, it
Yes,
was
yeah.
in both.
Because now that you tell that whole story, I vaguely remember that. Like I said, it's been about
Sorry, I'm going to be coughing.
Oh, that's okay. As long as you're not coughing on me.
Yeah, can't cough on you, on the
Yeah.
listeners.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So yeah, I read the book about 10 years ago. And so
Mhm.
I don't remember every little detail. And that's one I think that I have, forgotten about. But that is
Yes.
very interesting.
Yes. And it'll come up in their anyway, it'll come up here in a minute too during Damien and Jason's trial. Which is where we're headed. So there. So on Miss Kelly's trial, like we said, the only thing that the police had on Miss Kelly was his confession, and he did get convicted. So
Yeah. And there was no physical evidence.
Yes.
Okay.
So no physical evidence on Jesse for sure. So now we're headed into Damien and Jason's, and it kind of, literally their trial was set to begin February 19th. And up to that point, so after Jesse was convicted, the prosecutors were after him to turn witness for them. They really wanted him to testify against Jason and Damien. That was their, they wanted it so bad. And I'll kind of tell you. So the only thing that they had otherwise against the boys, and I'll just kind of read, this is from Mara's book. So they did have 3 fibers, okay? And these fibers were very common fibers. Evidently, they were fibers that when they went through the crime scene and went through Jason and Damien's homes, it was like, we're talking like a garment that maybe Jason's mom had or something. It was like very common Walmart fiber.
Okay.
So just FYI. So they said they couldn't even say that the fiber came from that particular garment to exclude all others. So that's how kind of flimsy the fibers were.
It was a very common fabric that anyone probably could have bought at Walmart.
You got it. And then, so Damien did have, you had kind of mentioned, and we talked about Damien being like a little bit of a ladies' man.
Yeah.
So he did have a girlfriend at that time. In fact, he had a very rudely carved tattoo of her name on his arm, and her name was Domini. And so she was actually pregnant, and she wouldn't have this baby until September, but she was pregnant during the trial, because this was like the September before the trial. So it was after the incident, but before the trial.
Okay.
So Damien was a father by this time. And basically Dominique had an aunt that evidently was going, like, the police had this aunt's claim that they had seen Damien and Dominique that day on the service road that led to Robin Hood Hills. So this was a problem, though, more of a problem for the cops than anything, just because it placed Dominique at the scene and didn't even discuss Jason. And really all it was saying was like, they saw them, but again, she would have been pregnant, not hugely pregnant, but pretty pregnant
right
at that time. And then there were a couple of kind of third-party hearsay statements made. So there was evidently a couple of girls from the community that came forward and stated that Damien at a softball game allegedly said how he had killed the boys and that he planned on killing others. So this was 2 girls at a softball game. And then the other item that came up actually against Jason was, so there was a dude named Michael Carson, and he was actually in the detention center in jail with Jason, and I guess, and he was in big time trouble. I'll just put this. He was on like LSD. I don't know. He had a lot of issues. He had a lot of problems, and he was in big time trouble himself. And basically he came forward, saying that several months ago, Jason had told him all about killing the boys. And he so he was just saying in jail, Jason told him about this, but again, he didn't really come forward until much later on. And so the police really felt like he wouldn't be very believable. And he was a teenager in trouble himself. And anyway, so they were concerned about this. And then the only other piece of the puzzle or any type of quote unquote evidence that the police had was they had sent some divers into the lake. And I think we kind of touched on this, but it was behind the lake where Jason lived. And they did find a knife in the lake. Now, they couldn't really say in this if the knife actually was used. There was no forensic or pathology to show that this, it's not like they got any experts up there to say that this knife was related. There was no,
Right.
There just was no evidence to conclude such, but they just presented the knife like, hey, it's a knife and we think it was dumped, behind the lake. But, and of course the trouble with the knife, and we'll kind of discuss it here in a minute, but it was just kind of flimsy too. So that's all they had, like literally. And the fact that Damien was, appeared to be cultish and satanic. And Jason
and
Moore.
They took that by his behavior and his dress.
Yes. And when you're watching, I'll just say from my perspective, like, because I was when I'm watching the documentaries again, like I was trying to give the jury, like, really, just trying to see from their perspective. And especially on Miss Kelly, I do understand they had a confession. I do get that on their part, but on Damien and Jason's, it's like, I really had trouble seeing from their perspective other than this is just scary. But I will say Damien came off very not great.
Well, and I remember that part of this because I remember, he would give certain looks and kind of smirk and this and that. And that's exactly what the media, that's what the cameras would focus on. And then the next day, in the news, when I was watching the news with my granny, remember?
Yeah.
There he would be smirking away or whatever. And I remember my grandmother would just be like, oh, look at that. Look at him. And so he didn't help his case by those types of things. But at the same time, if you're the mother of a teenager, you know that they're not happy very, like all the time. And especially if they think that they are being, wronged or railroaded or whatever. And I'm sure he had a lot of emotions going on during this time.
Sure. And he was, and I will say about Jason Baldwin. So when it came to Jason Baldwin and his attorneys would fight, with the judge about getting his trial split from Damien, because Jason, I mean, even in the trial, like he looked like a little choir boy. And in fact, like his teachers and everyone was shocked whenever he was arrested. I mean, they were absolutely shocked. Like his mom was a single mother. She was raising him and he had small siblings, and he would literally like get them ready for bed because she worked late, and then he would get them off to school. So he was a very good older brother. Evidently he was very good student. He wasn't like dropped out like Damien or Jesse. He was a very good student. In fact, his teachers thought that he should go to college for graphic design because he was he was an extremely talented artist. And really, other than being friends with Damien and wearing, Metallica shirts, he really, there was nothing like, and even his appearance and everything, when you're watching this, you're like, oh my goodness, he looks like a little angel. Like, he did not have the presence that Damien did, which Damien, like we just said, did not help his case at all because he came off extremely volatile, and he had emotional problems. He, like, all while he was on trial, he was there were incidents that he was trying to commit suicide. Like, he had a troubled existence. Like, he was not a happy person, and of course he was a manic depressive. So
and then you have just about the entire state of Arkansas,
Mhm.
declaring him guilty before a trial even happens. That's
Yes.
not fair.
Yes, and he's an 18-year-old boy. And
Yeah.
I don't want to say that like, oh, 18-year-old boys, but they don't understand the ramifications of what they're putting out there and such. And I will say during the trial, his attorneys do choose to put him on the stand, and it does not go well.
Yeah.
His answers aren't great. They do get to bring up everything about the cult, even though he's answering, he's trying to explain his position. And we did talk about how he doesn't believe it, like he's not a Satanist. He's not, he thinks that that's ridiculous, but he is into the Wiccan. He's into the witchcraft. He did
Didn't they pull out a library book or something he had checked out?
Yeah. Well, he had some notes. And he had written, I think he had even named his kid after this one Satanist guy. So that was kind of questionable to the jury. Like they were just trying to point, like the attorneys were just trying to point him in the direction of being a Satanist, and this being, he obviously had to do it because of that.
Right.
So yeah. So they go, the boys, like I said, they don't know if Miss Kelly is going to go against them. There's kind of, their attorneys are kind of going back and forth between February 19th because they have no clue. Are you typing?
Yes, I was writing down my follow-up questions.
Oh my goodness, that is loud.
You heard that? How did you hear that?
No typing.
Okay.
So
wow, Blue Lisa is like Commander, like Drill Sergeant Lisa.
I am really pissy pants when I'm when I'm sick.
Can I write with a pencil, or is the lead too loud?
I would say write with a pencil.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna have to have a drink on that one. I've got my water here, people. So okay. So anyway, we are talking about they don't know if Miss Kelly's going to go against them. So, Jesse has gone back and forth, and at first he said he will not go against the boys. Like he would not lie, because he felt like it was lying to go against them. Well, his attorney, Dan Stidham, finds out that prosecutor Vogelman actually, without telling Dan, gets to Jesse, brings Jesse out of his, holding or in his prison in Pine Bluff, and brings him, up to Jonesboro where they are, and is trying to tell him all these things to entice him, to go against the boys. And so he's like, oh, so he starts to tell even crazier stories. And then he immediately recants it and is like, no, my dad said I'm not going to lie, and I'm not going to lie. So no. So literally days before Damien and Jason's trial starts is when they know, like literally the day before is when they find out that he's not going to testify against them. So you can imagine his, Damien and Jason's attorneys are like glad, obviously,
right.
But Dan Stidham is like, he's like, really, Vogelman? That is so wrong to bring him. You knew you were trying to do this. And they were offering him a lesser sentence. And of course, I mean, I'll just say Jesse was not having a good time in prison. It had been extremely hard on him. It just wasn't good. He was he was 16 years old and he was having a rough time. So the thought of getting a lesser sentence obviously was appealing, but then he did decide to do like what his dad told him to. He's like, you've got to tell the truth. You can't lie. Yeah, you can't lie to get a lesser sentence. So he decides to not. So they move into the trial. February 19th, they do start the trial. So that's kind of where we're at. And like I said, the prosecution, they're going to call their witnesses. They don't really have too much going on, you know what I'm saying? So but they do present their stuff that of course the boys, attorneys try to counter everything. And I will say the judge, David Burnett, like it's kind of like and we kind of talked about this already, it's kind of like watching a basketball game where the refs are totally for one team.
Been there. I've
I
definitely
mean,
been in that situation.
that's how it felt. Like every single time, the boys' attorneys want something, he's like, nah.
Oh, wow.
And it's like he'll listen.
That
Like
sucks.
yes. I mean, they wanted for the Chris Morgan to come in and be able to go on trial in front of the juries, because that presents, some, okay, what? It presents some things. And so he said no.
So
In
wait
fact,
a minute. So the ice
Okay.
cream man they didn't bring all that up? And they didn't
Oh,
bring
no.
him?
The jury
What?
never knew anything about ice
The
cream man.
jury never knew anything about ice cream truck guy.
Nope, they never were introduced to any of that
I
evidence.
don't remember that. I didn't remember that. Oh my goodness.
No.
That is crazy.
So
That's absolutely nuts.
Yeah, I mean, all that the jury would hear basically is what the prosecutors brought up, and then they would Damien's
But the
attorneys.
incident. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
the
no.
incident at Bojangles was brought up, correct?
Well, I will say that, yeah. So the incident at Bojangles was brought up, and I don't know why I'm laughing. I think it's just the name Bojangles just cracks me up. But anywho, it was brought up, and it was even countered. So, that night that it happened, the police woman that was called, she didn't have time to even go in. She got called out for another. So it was a couple days later, and the cops did take samples because there was still blood. They left the blood for the police to come collect the evidence. So a couple days later, the evidence was collected. Well, they get, I will say, the boys' attorneys get the police officer on the stand for that. And he literally has to admit that they lost that blood.
They lost the blood from the wall.
They lost the blood samples from the Bojangles.
So the biggest crime in Arkansas history just happened, and you lost blood samples from a
that
scene
night,
from that night.
Because, I mean, more, yeah. And we'll kind of talk about Bojangles later, but they lost it. I mean, that could have told them a lot of information.
Now, is that their official statement? We lost it?
That was their official on the stand, that it got misplaced. Mm-hmm. And that it was never tested. So it was supposed to be sent in for testing, and it was never tested. It was misplaced. Wow. So they did have to admit that. So anyway, so they kind of go back and forth. And like I said, they're, trying to refute, but they, the state does have the Michael Carson. The state still has the Vicky Hutcherson, although Aaron Hutcherson was never called to the stand, and never her son's stories went so back and forth. The police didn't even go into that. So the jury's never heard Aaron Hutcherson's statement, other than during Miss Kelly's trial. They were playing his confession, and one of the ways that the police got Miss Kelly to talk was they played a little clip of Aaron's statements to them, which all it was him being a little 8-year-old boy saying, I'm the only one who knows. Like, that was all they played, but that was, I know, but that, I guess that got to Miss Kelly, and so it was played during Miss Kelly's confession. And like I said, none of this pertained, none of Miss Kelly's stuff pertained to Jason and Damien's trials. That wasn't admissible because it was all related to his. So after all the back and forth and after the debates, it does come back that the boys, they do get, convicted. Okay. So I think this trial.
How long was the jury out for?
I want to say it wasn't very long. I mean, it was just like a day, type thing. And so, they did come against, bear with me. I have my notes here. The fibers. I'm kind of catching up on my notes. They did have during the trial, we'll go backwards a little bit. They did have a Dr. Griffiths come to the stand to talk about occults, and evidently and this was for the prosecution. The prosecution had Dr. Griffiths. And the defense would question the expertise of the Dr. Griffiths, like, because he literally was like a mail order doctor.
What?
And they
what is a mail order doctor?
Well, they asked him what
and can
classes.
I get one of those?
Yeah, I know.
I'm working on my doctorate degree, and it's not
It's
easy.
not a mail order.
So can I just like send a check somewhere? No, I'm kidding.
Well, evidently back in 93 you could. So they asked Dr. Griffiths what kind of classes that he took in order to earn his doctorate. You know, they were trying to get to the fact that he was evidently an expert on the occult, and he admitted that there were not any classes that he had to take.
Wait. So how is he an expert on the occult?
Exactly. So he just says...
And they put him up there as an expert and
yes.
said, hi, this is our expert. I mean, that happened.
Yes. And they did. And I will say this. The judge came back and was like, in the state of Arkansas, there's no requirements of any expert. There's no... Anybody can be an expert of something. I'm like, did you just say that out loud?
Let's see. What do I want to be an expert in?
I know.
Dollar stores, maybe. I don't know.
I could be an expert on frozen Cokes, which, by the way, today I'm gonna have a little story about you, because I was headed to the doctor, and I told Amber I was headed to the doctor, and she said, I bet you it's COVID. And I said, okay, well, the bet is you owe me a frozen Coke if it's not.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So you owe me a frozen Coke, because I did not have COVID. I had flu.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
I have never tested. My blood refuses, or my nose refuses to test positive.
I would knock on some wood. I would find some wood in there somewhere.
Hey, I had the whatevers.
You had the whatevers?
Yeah, I literally.
It sounds like you have the whatevers.
I know. I literally took care of Elle when she had COVID. I will say this. So yes. So the judge came back, and I'm sorry. He just sounded. I mean, it was just one of those things. Like, did you really just say that, Judge? Like, that sounds so ignorant for a judge to even say. Like, anyway, it just. I don't know. This judge, I hate to say it. I mean, whether you think they're guilty or not, this judge. So that's all I'm going to say on that. But yeah, the defense would also bring up John Mark Byers, and his kind of weird. Did we talk about the John Mark Byers and the knife? I think we did in the last one.
Yes, we did.
So they did bring that back up, and just on every single point that they would bring up, like, the judge would continually go for the prosecution side of things. Like, anything that they, like the Chris Morgan, he wouldn't let the jury hear that. It was just always for the prosecution. So, with that being said, yeah.
Wow.
Yep. So again, their trial had started on February 19th, and it literally, like, that was when the jury selection happened, and then opening arguments were the 28th. So by March 17th, the jury deliberates, and like I said, they deliberated for only one day, and then the jury came back and found Damien and Jason guilty of capital murder and all three of the children's death. So the sentencing wouldn't come for 3 days later, because they were going, I mean, capital murder is a death sentence, and they were trying both of them as, adults. Yes. And so it did say in the sentencing phase, the jury sentenced Jason to life in prison and Damien to death. And the judge would talk about later how it was very serious to him about the death sentence. When he is reading the sentencing, he does take pause. I mean, he doesn't, it does affect him. I think it does linger there a little bit, but yeah. And they literally put Damien's execution date is set for May 5th. And Jason...
May 5th of that same year?
Yeah, but you know how that goes.
Yeah.
That always gets pushed back. But
I think they just and things like that.
Yes, I think they did just. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Was he the youngest Arkansan on death row?
I would say so. I don't know for sure, but I can only imagine, and I will Google
I would
that.
Google it, but you would get mad at me for typing.
You can Google on your phone. Now, don't make me laugh. You're going to make me cough. Okay. So there. So basically, Jason is incarcerated at the same penitentiary as Jesse, and Damien is sent to death row in the maximum security prison in Varner, Arkansas. And I don't know where Varner is. Do you?
No, but I can look it up while I'm also looking up all these other things on my phone, not my keyboard.
Well, thank you for that, Ambi. Okay, so this was 1994. This is March. So obviously, the next step in any trial situation, especially when we're talking about these kind of convictions, and we do have 3 individuals that are stating that they're innocent, they do start filing appeals. So they do start the appeals process by May of 94. And it does come back. The Arkansas Supreme Court, by February of 1996, they come back and issue a decision upholding the conviction of Jesse Misskelley. I think they did mention some verbiage about recognizing the kind of like the interrogation process. They kind of, it's like they said, hey, it wasn't great, but they didn't, it wasn't to the point where they were going to go against the original conviction. So February, so basically that's 2 years later, his conviction is upheld. At that same time, so remember we mentioned that those, the director, producer, and editors, the Berlinger and Sinofsky, had, they had been working, they were documentarians, and they were documenting this whole procedure. They had done a 10-month documentary, and so
they were everywhere. I mean, that footage, that's everywhere. One of like I mean, to me, amazing. Like, I watch a lot of documentaries, and they somehow got access to so much. And this was the 90s. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I'll kind of fall into that because they don't get access after this. So
really? So after the first one, they didn't get the same kind of access? Wow.
No. They surely didn't. And the film does suggest, obviously, that they were wrongfully convicted. And so people start watching this film. And it's going, of course it's
now it premiered on HBO, correct?
It was an HBO film, yes.
Okay.
And I do believe it was sent to festivals, of course, some film festivals, and was receiving high accolades. So it was receiving awards and doing really well. And I will say most HBO items, I haven't watched any that were terrible. You know what I'm saying?
I was about to ask you. This is a follow-up question to this whole documentary part. Okay, so what streaming service or what company do you think puts out the best documentaries? Do you think it's HBO Max? Do you think it's Netflix? I don't know. Maybe Netflix is so polished, but sometimes they don't have the amount of information that HBO Max has.
I will say that too. So
Hulu's
sometimes
definitely
they don't
not in the top 2. I want to say my top would be a tie between, like you said, Netflix and HBO Max, and then probably Paramount comes out with some good ones that I don't expect, and Peacock both come out with good ones.
I have an assertion here. So just talking about the Murdaugh murders, HBO put out theirs first, and it was really good. But then the Netflix came out, and I felt like the Netflix was better and more in depth.
Really?
Yes.
I'm partial to the HBO Max, but also that one had my shock value there because I wasn't shocked when I saw the one on Netflix. Because I watched HBO Max first. And we were so shocked. Scott and I could not stop watching that show. We were like, how is this? Because I remember reading little blips about the murders of the Murdaugh family, but it just it was it didn't really strike me at the time.
Well, yeah, because it was so weird because they were murdered in 20 21, and then he wasn't even
Yeah.
arrested for
Yeah.
like a year. And it was
Yeah.
only after he had done that weird stuff, like trying to have someone kill him on the side of the road. Remember something
Yeah.
weird? So
I dare say that's kind of in the same vein as Paradise Lost, because that Murdaugh documentary on HBO Max kind of changed the trajectory of all that too, because it became one of the most followed stories of last year. Probably the only true crime story that could rival that would be the Idaho situation, because both
that
of
is
those,
true. And I am waiting patiently for those docufilms.
I am waiting for those too. Yeah,
so
they'll
be coming.
Yeah, they'll be coming. That is weird too.
And
But
also
those were the two big stories.
What is it? The Gilgo Beach.
Oh, Gilgo Beach. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been following that. So with the popularity of this film, so three individuals found the West Memphis Three.org, and it is under the WM3.org that became so popular.
Yes,
so
I remember when that happened.
Yes, and their names are Burke Sauls. He was a writer, and then a Kathy Backen. She was like into she was a graphic design artist. And then there was his name was interesting, a Grove Pashley. He was a photographer. And so these three had seen the Paradise Lost, and kind of, just on their own decided, hey, we don't want these guys to go through this in a vacuum. Right. Basically they were feeling like, this shouldn't have happened, and they should, just the whole thing, the way it all went down. And so they build this website. They reach out to particularly Damien. He seems to be the contact mostly. And it does say not to downplay Jesse or Jason, but I think the biggest thing they felt like was, if you get Damien off, you get the other boys off. So it was kind of like
I would think so as well.
Yes. So that was kind of, and Damien's the one on death row.
Yeah, I was going to say it was important for all three boys to go through all that, but Damien had a very small amount of time there in the late 90s, early odds. So
yes, a much bigger state going on. So this gets started in 96, and kind of by the end of the year, so Jason and Damien had also been filing appeals, and they had their attorneys had filed 44 points, and particularly on Damien.
What's the average for appeals,
Average time frame? Or
average points, to have an appeal?
It didn't really say, but that was a lot, because they only had 1 point on Miss Kelly. So to have 44, I think they were trying to say that's a whole lot of points.
Wow.
And so what happened was, it was kind of like, whenever you have that many points, they did come back. They took longer, but they did come back and upheld the convictions. But they would kind of later go back and be like, well, there's a different thought. So I'm not going to fast forward to 1999. So this is 1996, end of 1996. So
that was a good year.
Ooh.
I love 1996. I think Scream came out that year. That was a good year. I loved that. It was a good year.
I was 15. That was a good year.
I was 15. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. So for most of it.
Well, it was a good year for me. Maybe not other people, but it was a good year for me.
I think it was, I don't know. Everything pre-Daryl just kind of is fuzzy. It's fuzzy.
Yeah, I know. I ask you, hey, do you remember when we did this and this in high school? You're like, no.
I'm like, no. No, if it was pre-Daryl, I'm like, no, I'm just kidding. It's like, no, I'm just kidding. I just don't have a memory for some things that you do. You got a good memory. Okay. So, kind of, do you want me to tell you a little tidbit that went on in 96? There's kind of some interesting stuff that went on.
Yes,
2 things.
Tell me.
Okay.
I'm all ears.
So, after the boys' trials, the Byers, I'm going to go back to the Byers. So, the Byers were kind of a mess. They were actually kind of drug informants, for the drug task force in Memphis. And they had some problems, legally, but because they were informants, they kind of got out of a lot of stuff. Like right before the boys were murders, John Mark Byers was a jeweler. And so allegedly he had ordered some Rolexes, and then he said that they were stolen, but then they found out that he had sold them to somebody. So he had just claimed they were stolen, but then he had actually sold them and received the money and just basically didn't, show that money.
Right.
So that was kind of going on. They kind of got out, like they were never really charged. They ended up being like sentenced to pay some restitution, but they never served any time for that. Okay. And then after all this happened, so they ended up moving away from West Memphis, because they were already having like financial woes and such, but they moved to Cherokee Village. And I think I had told you this, like they kind of got in some trouble with their neighbors. Like allegedly
Wow.
they stole from their neighbors like $20,000 worth of stuff, like personal stuff. And the neighbors were, had gone to the police. And anyway, they were never kind of like convicted of anything with that. I think again, it was kind of like just pay some restitution and get the heck out of here type of thing. It was kind of like leave Cherokee Village. Well, during that time frame of 1996, Melissa Byers, this is Christopher Byers' mom, she dies. And
oh my goodness.
Yes, and it's
How
kind
does she
of
die?
well, so it's kind of a mystery, and her death was never really settled. Like they did an autopsy, and it came back as undetermined. And John Mark, in Paradise Lost Part 2, the second part, and I'll kind of talk about that too. So they start filming, and they do interview him. So if you wanted to dive into that, go watch that part 2. But he just states that she was on she was an addict, and she was on some drugs, and basically they had told John Mark that she had a heart attack because he came in and she was dead, allegedly. Like he got home and she was in bed and she was dead. And he couldn't revive her or anything. And so he claimed, and then evidently the autopsy report claimed that there wasn't any physical, like there didn't appear to be anything physical, no assault type situation with her, but it just came back undetermined, which made it really like odd. So true story.
That is odd.
Yes. So that's kind of a
Wow.
side note. And then another weird thing with these families. So I think by 1994, so this is like literally a year after the boys' deaths, Terry Hobbs would actually be arrested for shooting Pam's like brother. I guess it's her brother-in-law, but so it was Terry's brother-in-law. He shot him in an altercation. I guess they had a lot of troubles. Evidently with abuse and domestic violence and all sorts of stuff. And so in some sort of, situation like that, family situation, Terry actually shot. He did not kill the brother-in-law, but he did shoot the brother-in-law. And he went into the hospital, and he didn't die at that point. I think he did die later on from complications from
the shooting.
Mm-hmm. But Terry Hobbs would serve some time. It wasn't like a huge amount of time, but
when
he did. This happened in 1994, so we're talking
right
a
after.
Year.
Yeah.
Yes. And Pam Hobbs and him would eventually divorce, so they divorced in 2004. So I do have some tidbits on all that. But kind of going back to Paradise Lost and the West Memphis Three. So, let me find it. So a lady named Lori kind of gets involved, and she's like, I want to say she was something hot. She was like living in New York City. I think she was an architect.
Yes.
Yeah. Like she was, I mean, she had it going on, and evidently she watched this film. And from that point on, she, started writing to Damien. And yeah, so in 1999, she married Damien, and she was working with the West Memphis Three.org. So she was very instrumental in all of that. But she did marry Damien, and they're still married to this day, actually.
Oh, wow.
But kind of to go back a little, so that Paradise Lost, I didn't mention this. This is like a fun little thing, but Metallica actually did, it's their music that was used in the Paradise Lost. And that was the first time Metallica had ever given permission for their
about to ask
music
they
to be used.
They don't let that
be
used
that
very often.
They do not. So I guess they own the rights to their stuff, and so they're incredibly
very smart. Yes,
they're very smart for that. So they had never allowed such.
Okay, so the Stranger Things, the puppet song, they allowed Stranger Things to use that song when what's his name? Eddie. When Eddie plays the guitar solo, that's a Metallica song, and
which they did fashion that kind of after these people, so maybe
they did. So maybe it's all connected. Who knows?
But yeah, but he was kind of, Metallica was into that, and probably because these.
Go ahead.
They did feel like these, especially Jason Baldwin, was kind of implicated because of his, band shirt and his love of Metallica.
That makes me mad. It really does. Oh, I walk into work today, and one of my friends says, "Hey, have you ever seen that show Dairy Girls?" And I say, "No." And he's like, "It was in the '90s, and you wear all these '90s shirts all the time." And so I guess that's something I need to check out. I don't know. I guess people notice I just wear '90s rock T-shirts a lot. So
do you have a Natalie Imbruglia shirt?
No, but that would be a rare find right there.
I know that would be.
I am eyeing some new ones. But I just bought a new Stevie Nicks a couple weeks ago. So.
Oh gosh, so we'll be seeing that.
So give me some twirling room.
Okay, we'll give you twirling room. Okay, so now we're getting back on topic a little bit.
Actually, I have a question. No? Okay, no, it's more like a side note.
Okay,
you forget Johnny Depp also was a big supporter.
Not yet, but yes, he was.
Not yet. Okay,
Johnny Depp. Yeah, we'll talk about all that because that comes more. That's a little bit later. So
okay,
yes, I'm sticking to a time frame, Ambi.
Okie dokie,
Ambien. Okay, which speaking of Ambien, I hope I sleep tonight. I've never taken Ambien, but I'm supposed to have some good cough syrup from my doctor, so hopefully I sleep tonight. Okay, so by December, in June 1999, so now we're fast forwarding. That was 96 that the Arkansas Supreme Court, upheld the convictions. So things are continuously getting worked on by the West Memphis Three. Of course, they're just building. They're building their following. They're building their website. They're just building. And simultaneously, the Paradise Lost 2 is being filmed from really 96 on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
but I remember
it's continuous.
Yeah, but I remember, like you said, watching the WM3 stuff just build and grow in real time, and that mostly transpired like during our college years.
Yes,
because there was a lot going on with that's when people, especially here in Arkansas, started doing a double take, going, well, wait a minute, because a lot of us that were small children when this happened grew up with the adults saying, oh, well, yeah, they did it. I'm sure they did it, blah, blah, blah. But those documentaries caused a lot of us to take a different look.
Yes. And not me at that point. Because again, I didn't see any of this till 2007. So there. So I was pretty obtuse, and I honestly thought the West Memphis Three was talking about the Three Little Boys. I did not know anything about it till 2007. So I'll just be honest. I was not into the news or cold cream.
Well, I was a reporter from like the age of 16 to the age of like 26, 27 before I started teaching.
Into the news than me.
I was like, I loved the news. I loved it.
I was into me and what I was doing. I'll just be honest. I was not very, when you're young and you're just like, I just wasn't very like,
I was into Me Too, remember? But I like to be
in a different way.
I like to be the little reporter girl running around.
Well, so Okay, well, we did talk about Damien getting married to Lori. So they had a Buddhist ceremony in prison. So
I do remember hearing that.
Just a side note on that. And then the Paradise Lost 2 came out in 2000. And it really centered on John Mark Byers. And I'll tell you this, the reason is because John Mark was the only person that would agree to be on film at this point. So, in fact, I believe it was 1997, Pam Hobbs filed a $10 million lawsuit against the guys, the producers and the director guys, because they had allegedly told her that they would not show any graphic pictures. So she was mad when she finally saw the film.
Now I have to say, as good as well done as those documentaries are, those scenes are pretty graphic and pretty alarming. And as a parent, that's I mean, like I said, that's the reason that I just haven't tore into some of those. I just couldn't watch those again.
Yes.
I think once was
They're
enough.
tough.
They're tough. And anybody that's thinking about watching Paradise Lost needs to go into it knowing these are very, very
it will
graphic
show the boys'
documentaries.
bodies. Yeah,
Yes.
in both. And we'll kind of talk about both films when we talk about in part. But yes,
and it happens in the first one right off the bat. Yeah, so you don't have any chance to just fast.
There's no easing into it.
There's no easing into it. It's terrible and shocking.
And the autopsy pictures are equally. So yeah, it's definitely hard. And I told Amber this was hard. This was a hard go for me.
I think it wore down your immune system.
Evidently, it made me sick. It made me get the flu. I literally had a nightmare about Elle during all this research stuff, and it's really weighed on me. So we decided that we're doing the next two podcasts are going to be fun, like Arkansas UFO sightings.
Yes.
Yeah.
UFO sightings and listener
stories.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, fun stuff, light stuff until we're going to stay away from murder for a minute. And so and then we're going to go back. But yeah, we need a break. So Paradise Lost 2, and I told you nobody would agree to do it. So the film was centered around John Mark Byers, and you'll watch it, and he's
Is that the one where he sings?
No, the first one is where he sings.
Okay,
the second one is where
he talks to the grave.
Nope, that's the first one too.
His wife's grave. Okay.
Now that's the second one. In the second one, he does go out to her grave, but in the first one, he's at Chris's
I just remember
grave.
Him taking Rose to her grave for some reason.
The second one, he is out. Literally goes back to the crime scene and starts a fire, talking about how he's gonna light the boys, the suspects, on fire. So yes. So it was in another life, he should have been in the theater. I don't know. He was very theatrical in everything that he did. But he was the only one that agreed to be on film. And so the film does suggest that he was the actual murderer because it's just showing him, and it's very bizarre. It's just bizarre.
Wait, how did he react after that film, after the second film?
He was always talking about how I can't believe people are after me. And he was just, any time, in the documentaries will show this, but any time that they were going back to court, he was always there. I mean, he was always at court and he was always on camera. And in fact, he would go talk to the West Memphis Three-org people, who were also in the documentary, part 2 or whatever. And he would be yelling at them. And then they'd be like, well, you were just nice to us, John Mark, whenever the cameras aren't around. But as soon as they come around, you're crazy. And yeah. So he was putting on a huge show for sure. So, and he was always upset that he knew people were pointing the finger at him and he was not happy about it. So, and we'll kind of talk about another dad that got the finger pointed at him. So, but in 2001, there is a different attorney for Eccles, and he files a writ of error, quorum nobis, into the Arkansas Supreme Court, arguing that Eccles should never have been tried in 1994 because of his mental condition at the time. So this was filed at 2001. And again, there's a lot going on this whole time. These people are the West Memphis Three, the suspects, Jason and Damien and Jesse, they're becoming, celebrities, so to speak. So, they're known, they're very well known. They're getting a lot of street cred. They're getting a lot of money. So, in April of 2001, the Arkansas Supreme Court does rule that Judge Burnett failed to give sufficient attention to Eccles' arguments in his rejection of Damien's Rule 37 petition. And the Supreme Court sends the case back to Judge Burnett for further consideration, because when you're on death row, the judge is supposed to outline, there were like 44 things, and they're supposed to outline the reasoning why. Okay, so basically, the Supreme Court just sends it back to Judge Burnett that he just did not take time to answer on all of these items, basically. Now, in 2002, this is when Mara's book comes out. So, we've talked about Mara's book. It is called Devil's Knot, the true story of the West Memphis Three. They do make a movie about it. It is very, very loosely based. I would highly suggest reading her book because it's very in-depth. And I hear screaming at your house. That's awesome. And
yep, I hear a toddler.
I hear Maxie screaming. And so the movie doesn't come out until 2014. And again, it kind of centers on Ron Lax, of all things, but it is Colin Firth and Reese Witherspoon. So, watch it for fun, but it really doesn't have a whole lot of actual stuff going on in the movie. I feel like it's just really for.
I was very disappointed in that movie. I thought that it would have a little more to it.
Yeah, it didn't have much depth, and it really just centered around Ron Lax. So I was like, oh, okay. In 2000, so now we're in 2003. It does say with an interview with the Arkansas Times, Vicki Hutcherson comes back and says everything that she told the police was a lie. So basically, she admits.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so she admits that the police kind of told her that if she didn't cooperate, that basically she would get in trouble, because she was initially at the police department. We went into this. She was in trouble, being polygraphed for stealing money from her company, allegedly. So the company she was working for. And so Vicki does say that she was scared. The police told her to lie, and that's what she did. They wanted her to cooperate, and she was trying to get out of trouble. And likewise, she was also trying to get the reward money. Now the biggest thing, and again, not to recant this again, but this whole time people are the whole time Damien's attorneys are working. He is on death row, so they are just working. And also something that's coming about is called DNA. So, this started in 93. They did collect all this stuff. There were, like, even though it was
just not from the Bojangles restaurant, apparently.
No, because those were lost. But it does say DNA collected from evidence at the crime scene is tested again in 2007. So none of that DNA matches Eccles, Baldwin, or Miss Kelly. Nothing. And there was hair. There was from the knots and stuff, there was skin. There was DNA there.
DNA.
Oh yes. There was DNA. There might not have been a plethora of blood hanging out because of the crime scene situation, but there was stuff. And so they did retain the stuff. And it did say, now on a big note, it did say a hair found in a knot used to tie up one of the victims is found to be not consistent. And it says that's kind of the way they worded it is weird, but it is consistent with Terry Hobbs. So he is found to be associated. And then also there was more to that. This doesn't say everything there, but it does say that even Terry Hobbs' friend, I think his name was David, his DNA was found as well. And Terry allegedly had been around his friend that day.
Really?
Yes. So we're talking, yeah.
Wow.
Yes. So, because I understand Terry Hobbs being, this was his son, his stepson lived in his house. Obviously his DNA would be there, but this is on one of the other victims. This is on one of the other victims. And then it's also pulling in one of Terry Hobbs' friends. So someone Terry Hobbs was with that day. And then it does say, when all this comes out, it says, John Mark Byer tells the media he now believes that the West Memphis Three, are innocent. So, and kind of at the same time frame. So you were kind of talking about Johnny Depp, but kind of Eddie Vedder. I don't even know who is that.
Him.
Is
Pearl
he?
Jam.
Who is he? Pearl Jam? Yeah. I don't know. Anywho, Eddie Vedder, and Natalie Maines from the Dixie Chicks, because that's what she was at the time. They go to a rally in Little Rock, and they are very.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, we were, I think, in college or right out of college.
Yes. Well, this would have been. It says 2007. And
yeah,
she does.
That's right out of college. Well, 3 years after.
I do remember watching this clip because it was in the, in the documentary number 3 that was happening. And so it does mention, like, evidently she was implying or not saying that Hobbs was involved in the killing of his son and the 2 other boys. And I don't think that anyone was like, Terry Hobbs did it, but they were not shy about saying that his DNA was found.
Oh,
yes, they were implying it. And so, and I don't, I heard her speak. I don't think she ever even mentioned him, but she did get involved. A lot of celebrities were getting involved at the time. And quite honestly, they were really making like the judge and Fogelman really mad, which was interesting. They're like, oh, they're just so famous. That's the only reason, blah, blah, blah. But this is 2007 that this happened. So that was a huge turn of events. And likewise, in 2008, so a year later, evidence surfaces that a man named Kent Arnold, who was the jury foreman in Jason and Damien's trial, he discussed the case with the attorneys prior to deliberations and advocated.
Oh, wow. You can't do that.
Yes, and he was advocating within the jury room. So evidently, from other things that I had read and such, he really wanted to be on this jury, and he was really glad he got put on the jury, and then he was made a foreman. And then he was even telling people about Miss Kelly's confession, which of course was inadmissible in this trial.
So they knew.
So they knew about the newspaper reports because he was telling them. So basically he was pushing for their conviction within the jury. So that was a big problem that came up. It does say in September of 2008, Judge Burnett denies the request for a retrial. He says, holding that the DNA evidence produced by the defendants was inconclusive. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. I mean, at every turn.
Insane. I can't believe this happened in Arkansas. I can't believe it.
I mean, I really was trying to look at things very obtusely. And again, whether you believe innocence or guilt, like, come on. I mean, come on. So this was 2008 now, and we're in 2010. So the Arkansas Supreme Court, they do order a trial court judge to determine whether newly discovered DNA evidence or the evidence of the jury misconduct concludes that there should be a new trial or exoneration. So what happened, thankfully, in 2008 was Mr. Judge finally was running for Senate, and he won, so he was out, which was unfortunately when you're dealing
the judge that was okay, so the judge in the West Memphis Three case became a senator.
He became a senator.
Is he still a senator?
No, he was briefly a senator. I think he served from 2010 to 2016.
Oh, okay.
But he would become a senator, which was really the best thing ever for Damien because, unfortunately in all this, like, the courts go back to the original judge, which I do understand that a little bit because they're familiar with the file. But when you show that much bias, it's like, really?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean,
come on.
Right there. We can, yeah.
Yes. And actually the DNA stuff, DNA was coming about really big in 2001. So a lot of cases were coming back to to DNA testing in '01. So this was '07. So, the fact that he's saying this is just, inconclusive, 7 years after they were supposed to be going back and looking at these cases anyway is just ridiculous. So, and we're talking about someone that was on death row. And I do have a tidbit about silly little Judge David Burnett as well, which is interesting to me. Okay, so this was in the end of 2010. So of course, the West Memphis Three organization and the guys are like, yes. So, and the state is like, do we really want to retry this? So what happens is by 2011, after the state has gone back and forth, so the state decided to offer the three an Alford plea, which, if anyone's watched The Staircase, on you can watch it on Netflix, and then HBO did a little thing as well.
Staircase documentaries, and wait.
Well,
no, one of them is a
show. It's more of like a show.
Yeah, but that one's the one that has Toni Collette, right?
Yes. Now, I will say the one on HBO actually does talk about a lot of things that happen behind the scenes of the documentary, which is very interesting.
Well, so I will tell you
I would watch them both.
Well, I'll tell you this. I just looked up Alford plea because I was going to read the definition, and the staircase case comes right up as soon as you put that in there. But in criminal law, an Alford plea, and this is from Butcher Law Group, an Alford plea is a type of guilty plea in which the defendant does not admit to committing the crime, but agrees that the prosecution has enough evidence to obtain a conviction.
Yes. And so basically and what happened was, so Jason did not want to do this, period. He has steadfastly never wavered his innocence. Him and Damien both. So Jason did not want to do this. He wanted to go to retrial. And looking at this, honestly, I cannot see that a retrial, I think the retrial would have been very good for the guys. I mean, because even the first trial was extremely questionable, and obviously had jury tampering and all kinds of stuff going on in hindsight. So, but they do decide, so because Jason understands that Damien is on death row, and plus the fact, so as soon as you do this Alford plea, you're done. I mean, it's kind of like time served, because you're saying you're guilty. They're giving you a whole lesser of a sentence, and they've already served at this point 18 years in prison.
Wow.
So there's really it's kind of a no-brainer, except it sucks for them. I mean, and Jason was this was extremely hard for Jason, less hard for Damien just because he was on death row. And he just wanted out. He wanted to live his life. And of course Jesse wanted out. I think he was just like, I'm out.
Yeah.
But anyway, but Jason, this was really hard, but he did, they did maintain their innocence, although they have to plead guilty with that Alford plea. And so really, and then right after this, so the film West of Memphis comes out, and it is produced by Peter Jackson, who is excellent, and directed by Amy Berg. It premiered at Sundance, and it's extremely good. And of course, you mentioned Damien wrote some books about this. So we will go, and the West of Memphis does single in very big on Terry Hobbs.
Okay.
And I will say, looking at everything,
Hobbs. Did they get sued too?
I don't believe so. But I will tell you.
So I will tell you about this.
Well, I will. Yeah. So we'll talk about that. So after Natalie does her thing in 2007, so Terry Hobbs does file a lawsuit against Natalie in 2009. He doesn't win this lawsuit. In fact, it's determined that he has to pay her legal bills.
Oh, wow. Dang.
Yes. Woo. But it was very interesting because it did open up the fact that he got to be, I don't know how you even said, they had to do deposition. So he was deputized.
Oh, wow.
Under oath. Yeah. And so they could ask him all these questions. And I will say, it is go back. Everyone needs to go back and watch West of Memphis. A lot of this is in there. And also on, I believe it's the third and final Paradise Lost, the number 3. So I mean, I'm sorry. He did not help himself. He was very, very, very weird. In that bizarre, like John Mark Byers bizarre, but even more of a guilty bizarre type situation. And so kind of bringing you to current day, like nobody, as far as the state's concerned, they pled guilty. So as far as the state's concerned, there's not an open case. They pled guilty. Boom. What's going on now is the Innocence Project. And Damien is still working because he wants to not only be like he's free, but he also wants to be exonerated, and all of them, want to be exonerated. And so now you can go to the Innocence Project, and what they're trying to do and what he's repeatedly worked on doing is to get more DNA testing done. And we're talking as of this past year, they're still working. They had been told
they were just kind of denied again, weren't they? In 2022.
In 22 they were, but they were still working on some other things in 23. Okay. I think they had filed some more motions in 23, and I could not find anything to follow up on the 23 filings. So they're still working on it, and you can go in, and if you want to get on a petition, you can. The biggest thing to me, because I went on there myself, the Innocence Project website does state to go watch The Paradise Lost, to read the book, Mara's book, and it says to watch The West of Memphis. Yes, it definitely does not mention watching Devil's Knot movie, because that will not help you to know anything.
No.
But I will say,
Reese acted her little heart out, though.
She did. She always does. To kind of give you an update on the people, so we're going to do an update. We're going to give our input, and then we're going to finalize on the boys, whom I think is really the most important part is the victims. But so Damien was in New York with his wife. So after he got out, he was in New York. But then recently, from what I understand, as of 21, they moved to New Orleans. So he is living in New Orleans, probably working on all his magic, which I hate, and living his best life. I hate magic. I hate it, especially since I've got the flu. I hate everything. No, I'm just kidding. And so he is still married to Lori. And of course they are still working, on the exoneration part. So they are still working, on the westmemphis3.org and the Innocence Project.
Well, it looks like he's published some magic books.
Yes.
Magic with a K. I'm going to buy those for you for Christmas.
Oh, don't even. I will throw them back, or I will re-gift them to you. I hate magic. Okay. So, it does say, he is on Facebook, and it says his job is ceremonial magician and artist. And he does, it looks like they have not had any kids, together. So he would just have the one that was grown. And I don't know if he has any connection really, to that child, because he was incarcerated for most of his life. Now Jesse Miskelly Jr. has, kind of lived a little quiet, except he was arrested in 2017 for a slew of traffic issues.
Oh no, Jesse, really?
Yeah, he just, and I think he did eventually graduate. I think he did get his GED. So he did some improvements, but not near as much as I would say Jason. So Jason is living in Austin, Texas. He had briefly, I believe, lived in Seattle, and he has co-founded a Proclaim Justice. And from what I could find out, he was going to law school. And again, he was kind of his teachers and everybody that knew him thought that he was going to college way back when. I mean, he just had a lot of promise. So he has become, of course, an activist for, people and that are, wrongfully judged, as you can imagine. So there's not anything about Todd and Diana Moore. They pretty much after, they were briefly, Michael Moore's parents were very briefly in Paradise Lost. And I can say, I hate to say this, but they honestly seemed like the most normal family ever. They just kind of, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
out of all the families, unfortunately. It looked like the Hobbs definitely had issues. The Byers had issues, which we'll kind of get into in a second. But the Moores just kind of seemed like just normal people that were just, their kid just, happened to have this extremely, extremely awful thing happen to them. And I'm sure it devastated their family, but I could not find anything on them. They have not been arrested or anything going on with them. It did say Pam Hobbs. So she was arrested twice since 2007. So she was arrested in 2007 for some domestic items. And, she had already divorced Terry. And I believe she was living in like Blytheville. I don't know if she's back in West Memphis or Blytheville. It did look like she was also arrested in 2014 for trespassing. So yes. So she did some trespassing and some other items. I think I had a note on this. So yeah. Resisting arrest, trespassing, and disorderly conduct was Pam in 2014. So she has not lived her best life. And then Mark John Byers, we discussed him. He ended up going to jail even for drugs or something eventually. He did pass away. I think he passed away in a car accident in 2022. So he did pass. John Mark Byers did pass.
Yeah, I read that too.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of an update on everybody. Oh, now this judge, David Burnett, I do have a little bit of an update on him. I believe he's still kicking, but he did go into the Senate, which was a blessing for the three because it got him out of the judgeship. So he did spend some time in the Senate, and he was actually, I thought this was very ironic. He was on a committee, and he was a Democrat, and he was on the Senate committee that was against and tried to overturn the death penalty in Arkansas.
Oh, wow.
I thought it didn't go through, but I thought that was very interesting. I'm like, really? Because you don't walk the walk and you just talk the talk. But anywho, so thought that was super interesting. So now, Ambi.
Yes.
Ambi.
Yes.
We need to go into our thoughts. So what is your thought? Who did it to you, or who is the best suspect? Do you think that the boys are guilty? What do you think? What is your opinion?
Well,
putting you on the hot
since
seat.
You stopped me from making my notes, I was going to type up what I was going to say. So now I'm just going to have to just kind of say,
wing
it. Yes, I'm going to have to wing it. I don't know. I mean, like I said at the beginning of all this, it's always been one of those stories that, it's been like a core memory, I guess, because I remember when it happened being shocked. I remember watching news and stuff about the trial. And then I did keep up with it in college and when they were starting all these efforts to try to get the boys out. Now, I think that when I was younger, I leaned more towards it was the teenagers that committed the crime because that's what everyone around me would say. They all believed that it was the three teenagers. It wasn't until I watched the documentary. I think I saw it in college the first time. I didn't see it when it came out. I think I saw it like maybe freshman, sophomore year of college. But it was after that I started having doubts. And, a lot of people that I hung out with at the time, we would talk about it and they had the same doubts. We're like, yeah, what if they didn't do it? Right. And so it was not shocking to me that movement started and gained so much momentum so fast. And then, as DNA progressed and got better, and they had none of it that tied the teenage boys to the crime, that also made me more sure that I didn't think that it was, done by the teenager. Sorry, my toddler's back there just screaming. But anyway, so who did it? Do I think? I don't think it was the teenage boys that committed this crime, but I really don't know. I don't know. I mean, you and I have kind of talked about the whole Bojangles element to this. Yes. And how the person in that situation was not they didn't find him. They didn't really look for him, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
And then they didn't
Yeah.
collect and keep the DNA like they should. And,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's a red herring. Maybe it's something that just happened to take place on the same night.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But that's the only thing
Yeah.
that really sticks out in my mind. And
It's Mr. Joe Bangles.
you mean Bojangles? It's Bojangles.
Bojangles. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the only piece of this that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what if it was just somebody like a transient that just came in and did it and
Mm-hmm.
left? I mean, did they ever check for similar crimes in other states that were like this one?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. I guess for me, like when I first watched it, I guess I immediately upon seeing the way that the boys were dealt with, I immediately thought there was no way it was the teenagers. I mean, it was just kind of like, I don't know, that I can understand if they were just kind of beaten up and pushed to the side, but I just immediately felt like, I mean, this was a little bit sophisticated in the fact that it wasn't planned. I felt like it wasn't planned just because all of the material, like I didn't feel like it was a serial killer, just because I think a serial killer would do an even better job of this, but also because the items used on the boys were their own items. Like it wasn't like zip ties or, I mean, it was not like a Dexter situation where everything's so neat and pretty, but it was also a lot more sophisticated than like a teenager could do. You know what I'm saying? I don't know, for me. And then the Bojangles, yeah, I'm not buying the Bojangles just because, I mean, it was West Memphis in 93. I think a man coming in bloody, whacked out with a cast on probably happened a lot. Not to say it did, but it probably happened. It's probably happening right now. So maybe. But the fact that they lost the evidence really stinks because it at least could have put that to bed. Like it could have put that to bed. I really think all they would have found was that it was his DNA. It was his blood. I think he got into an altercation and was bloodied or whatever. But I do believe, like, the Terry Hobbs thing. I think for me, Terry Hobbs is I think, he's portrayed in all of the stuff to be the biggest suspect at the end. And I would have to lean that direction just because they did have a lot of people that were helping the team in 2007, like forensic pathologists and such, and saying that they felt like this person knew. It was a personal thing. It wasn't a sexual thing, but it was a personal thing.
I could see that. But I've always thought that maybe the boys saw something they weren't supposed to, kind of like the boys on the tracks.
I think there was an altercation probably between Stevie and Terry, and I could kind of see like things got out of control and then it happened and then you have to deal with it. And I think he was at least sophisticated enough to try to hide it, try to hide it a little bit. I don't think John Mark Byers could do that because I think that he would be on the news telling exactly what happened.
I was fixing to say he would just tell the whole story.
Yeah, he was bizarre. So I think that he was too out there to even keep anything quiet. But I do think for me, Terry Hobbs seems to be the best suspect. And I wish that they would look further into that. I just wish that they would. So at least because he wasn't even, I mean, all of these parents, every single adult close to these kids, like Boy Scout leaders, like teachers, like every single person should have been interrogated.
I agree to that.
Yeah, definitely. They should have looked at every single person. But they were so narrowed in by the cult, satanic, it has to be Damien stuff that they...
probably the person that really did it got the heck out of Dodge and never came back to Arkansas.
I mean, you never know. So,
that's kind of where I'm at. I don't think that person has set foot in Arkansas since that day.
Yeah.
That's mine.
I
That's mine.
disagree,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's okay. You know, and I want, okay, so I do want people to message us like their thoughts. Please message us on all the stuff, the Instagram and the Facebook and the and the email. I do want to finish up because I feel like the victims like are never really talked about and they kind of get lost in all this. So I want to kind of go into it, kind of end on this. Do you have anything else before I just talk about the victims one more time?
Nope, I don't.
Okay. We're going long and this is driving you crazy, but it's okay. It's okay, Amby. Okay. So Stevie Branch, he was 8 years old. He was 4 feet 2 inches tall. He weighed only 65 pounds. He had blonde hair. He had blue eyes. He had these little freckles and he had like this little spiky haircut, you know, that you would see in the early 90s, kind of late 80s. He was adorable. He was wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt. And he was riding a brand new black and red bicycle, I believe that his grandfather had given him. And he was an honor student. He was a very good student. He was very diligent. He just had a little 4-year-old sister that he loved. And he is buried in Mount Zion Cemetery in Steele, Missouri. So he was just adorable. Looking at those pictures, he was adorable. Chris Byers, he he was also 8, but he was only 4 feet tall. So he was a little bit shorter than Stevie. He only weighed 52 pounds. He had light brown hair and he was last seen wearing blue jeans and dark shoes and a white long sleeve shirt. He just was kind of the typical 8-year-old boy. It said he believed in the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. Like he was just normal 8-year-old boy. And he was not on the bike. So the other 2 were riding the bike. So he was riding along with them. And he is buried in Forest Hill Cemetery East in Memphis, Tennessee. We need to go visit that. So now on to Michael Moore. So Michael Moore was about the same size as Stevie. So he was a little bit taller than Chris. So he was 4 feet 2 inches, 55 pounds. He had brown hair and he was last seen. He was the one in the Boy Scouts. Like he loved to wear his Boy Scout stuff. He was wearing a Boy Scouts of America shirt. And he had on his Boy Scout hat. It said that he loved being in the Boy Scout. He loved wearing his outfit and stuff. And he was seen riding his light green bicycle. He was said that he was kind of like the leader of the pack, or so to speak. Just kind of a natural leader. And he is buried in the Crittenden Memorial Park Cemetery in Marion. So these were 3 little boys. They do have a memorial. So the school erected a memorial in 94, and it's Weaver Elementary School. And there is a plaque, and it did say they did a special 20th anniversary in 2013. And they were going to they raised funds to refurbish the memorial. So if you get a chance, to go by their graves or go to the memorial, and please go on the Innocent Project website, because I guess for me, Damien and them are out. They're out. They have their freedom. I'm glad that they did get that ability after the trial that they went through. Because I'm like Amber, I don't believe that they did it. Although there are a lot of people on the internet that do believe that they were guilty. But yeah, just go on the Innocence Project, and every little bit, I guess, can help if you're signing a petition or whatever, to just get some more DNA testing done. So, because this case isn't closed, it's not closed. So, and really think about the victims, the poor 3 little boys that were killed senselessly and tragically. So, that's who I think of. But yeah, we're going to put this to bed. So,
yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a great way to end it, just talking about the victims. So we want to thank everybody for sticking with us through 3 episodes, and please let us know what you think. It's okay. Yeah. It's okay that, it deserved a lengthy one. So we will see everybody back here in a few days for another episode of Unexplained Arkansas.
Yay. Love ya.
Love ya.